We'll give everybody a minute or two to show up here. Hey Lee, how are you? So Lee, I'm assuming you can hear us. We got a couple people that joined the Hangout. Um, I will sort of do quick intros, but just gonna but just like about basics to finish up the conversation on the webinar technology. I was really looking for a way to schedule Hangouts better because last time when I tried to do these Hangouts with everybody, it's so helpful. The scheduling was awful. People couldn't figure it out. I had to like email multiple times, and it just basically took forever. And so, what I liked about Webinar Jam did was they were able to give me a custom hot link that I could put in the emails I send out. So I could automatically embed. I could basically code your name and email address in. That's all you had to do is click the button and be added to it. So I thought that was really valuable. And then another link for people to sign up and then to send out the notice. There's not much that I think it needs to make an MVP to do this, and so that's what I was hoping to get out of Webinar Jam. And so far, it's been rough. So
it's a process, isn't it?
It's a process. So hopefully Jevin will come up with something better, and I can start giving him my money. So great. Okay, so guys, I'm going to get started and let people sort of join as they come in. So I'm going to switch over to actually, I'm just going to, since we don't have a lot of people in here, I'm just going to like do a quick just ask you guys to like the 5-second intro, like where you are, what you're working on, and the name, and then I'll sort of move around the room. So Gail, I don't know if you can hear me or your mic is working, but you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So 5-second intro. I'm Gail Stafford, and I manage a group of business analysts at University of Illinois, and I'm also running Gail Stafford Company, which is a management consulting for technology companies and information technology departments.
Excellent. And Justin.
Sure, Justin Wilcox. My blog is Customer Dev Labs, and the product I'm working on right now is something called Customer Acquisition Teams. These are virtual peer groups for lean startup founders.
Great, and Spike is about to jump in. So Kai, greetings from Ecuador.
Hey, my name is Kai. I'm in Ecuador right now. I hail originally from Montana. I'm working on a email encryption service to really lock down and raise privacy in communications right now. So customer development process, doing a lot of that right now. It's good.
Excellent. And I'm going to unmute Spike. And so why is Spike muted here? Why can't, maybe Spike has his mic muted. Spike, I don't know if you want to do an intro. Otherwise, okay, there you are.
Yeah. Hi, thanks for having me. I'm working on basically trying to figure out how to help more entrepreneurs succeed. So I'm doing a lot of calls on SoHelpful and talking to other mentors and people working in the lean startup and design thinking space, trying to find more interesting stuff to do with training and helping entrepreneurs.
It's great. And Spike's a really interesting guy. Spike, are you still living north of San Francisco in the, and I'm going to forget the name of it, but the Buddhist community?
Yeah, it's a city of 10,000 Buddhists. I'm really out in the sticks, but we get internet, so it's pretty cool.
That's awesome. And we got Lee here, who gave me lots of great advice when doing webinars, and of course I didn't listen, and that's why I had to suffer the consequences of the past 10 years.
Hey, it's Lee Schneider. I run Red Cup Agency, which is a communications agency, and I'm also doing a lot of teaching and starting a new product to help with startups.
Awesome. Well, great, guys. I'm going to jump right into things, and I'm going to rely on you to sort of interrupt me as we go through. So switching to screen. Great. Can everybody sort of see the slides? It should say "Becoming So Helpful" up there.
Yep.
Okay, great.
Yeah, that's good.
All right. So I see some other people are posting chat messages, but I can't tell if they're in the webinar jam or a different chat screen. I don't know if anybody else can see that. Perhaps it's just a Google Hangout bug. So I'm just going to go ahead and move on. So. Okay, so I'm gonna, what I want to talk a little bit today is kind of share some of the case studies what I'm learning for how people are doing this to actually grow their business, and then to offer some tips on like what people can do to get started. So for some of you who are already doing this very successfully, the forum will probably be most interesting to kind of hear what everybody else does. For those of you who are people who are maybe watching this that are about to trying to get started. Yeah, the latter might be more interesting. And is that Brian Jordan who just joined us there? I see a Brian in there, but so I'll let Brian jump in the chat. I think that's Brian Jordan. So the wonderful news is that two of the people in the case studies are here today. So Brian's actually offline, so I'll have to speak for him. But since Justin's here, Justin can actually tell his story instead of me, which will make it a lot more interesting to all of us, as I'll get a chance to learn too. So let me just sort of jump right into things. As I have gone and been and figuring out how to do this with what my work is, and to talk to all of you and see how you're actually using the product, and more generally talk to people about this whole idea of being helpful as a marketing strategy. There seems to be at least 3 direct reasons, possibly as much as 5, for why people are doing this. Can everybody? Is that Scott that just joined us?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Hey Scott. Scott, you want to do the 5-second intro?
Sure. Me and a business partner for the last 6 months help early stage startups with their business strategy and helping them to onboard their first 500 users. Great.
And we have so we also have Jen Mendez and Brian Jordan watching, both who are just incredibly awesome people, and I'm glad to have them as friends and colleagues. So I'll jump in with questions for them too at some point. So so I want to get down to why are people doing this? And as I've sort of gone out and going back to 18 months ago when I was doing my initial customer development on this idea of being helpful and maybe helping people over Skype and Hangout, there's a lot of sort of intangible, indirect reasons why people want to be helpful. And it's I meet people all over the world. I have fun. It feels good to help people out. Doing this is a lot. It saves time, and it's a way to build my network without going to coffee shops and meetups. And so I think that's pretty much. I hear that sort of consistently as sort of an indirect reason why people do this. And for some people, that's enough. That's enough of a reason to keep doing this. Maybe they think of themselves as a startup mentor. They want to get back. I mean, there's that's enough of the reason for them. What we're going to talk about today is more the direct, why are we doing this very intentionally to drive our business, and why why being helpful is a better way to market ourselves. And so I'm going to go through some very 3 specific reasons of which I have evidence based on what you've told me, and then 2 more which I have a sort of an instinct, but I don't have evidence yet. So I'll give you an opportunity to either maybe point me in the right direction or shout me down on those. So, so the first one is I don't think I have to spend a lot of time convincing people this, because most people sort of get it if you've been in business at all, and it's that basically that sales. And if you if you can look at whatever metrics from the direct marketing industry that we sort of all love and hate, and that's phone calls convert better than websites. And there's now more and more. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I just lost the screens. I can hear you, but I didn't see the slides that you're going through. Are you still running the slide deck?
Yeah, can anybody else see the slides?
Yeah, work for me.
Okay.
There we go, they're back.
They're back? Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, if that happens, just sort of interrupt. Although I will tell you the slides are sort of light on content. I'm mostly going to be repeating what's in there, so if you lose them, you won't lose that much. So I don't think I have to spend a lot of time in maybe convincing people this, except to say that one of the things that I've noticed working with early stage entrepreneurs around the world is there's so much out there in the web in the past 5 to 10 years about data and optimization and conversion and websites and content marketing, all this stuff, and it takes some time, effort for me to convince them hey, just pick up the frickin' phone. If you'd actually just call these customers, since you don't have any, your odds of converting those first 10 are a lot higher than you are trying to build out a massive audience of content. So I'm going to give some examples now of people doing that. And one is, now Justin, am I going to say this correct? Mark Horszowski, is that right?
That's real close. Horszowski.
Horszowski. Okay. So Mark is a good friend of Justin's, and so I'm going to give sort of a very quick overview, and then let Justin sort of correct me with perhaps more insights, since he works with Mark more than I do. But I interviewed Mark yesterday about SoHelpful. Mark runs a site called Moving Worlds, which is a startup that just recently closed a round of funding, which was oversubscribed, which if you're not from the startup world means that there was more people that wanted to give him money than he was willing to take. So it's a very good place to be if you're an entrepreneur, and I think speaks to sort of the validation of what Mark's building. So I guess the way I would characterize it is Mark is providing a subscription service for people who want to go work abroad, build their skills, give back socially. It helps match them up with good opportunities so they're just not kind of trolling on websites to try to find a place to go stay and work. And as I talked to Mark about how he's using SoHelpful, it's really in his sales pipeline. So an example would be, somebody expresses an interest in traveling abroad to sort of further their career, and Mark is willing to help them, spend 30 minutes with them to help them figure out how to get a meaningful international global social experience out of that. And the obvious implication is that that's a lot more likely that people are actually going to sign up for his service once he has a chance to talk with them, hear about them, and they trust him that he actually knows what he's talking about. And in the cases where that doesn't happen, of course, just having the conversation helps create evangelists, helps give insight into pricing and all the other questions that people have about a product. So, Justin, you know Mark better than I do. You want to weigh in with anything? I've given that kind of brief highlight there.
No, I think you've captured it. It's Peace Corps meets Match.com. So if you want to volunteer your expertise, he will match you with opportunities to do so. And sounds like he's using SoHelpful to get people in the pipeline. You got it.
Okay, Peace Corps meets Match.com. I like that. That's great. Okay, so the next one, Justin, I'm just going to let you just jump in, and I won't say a word. So since this is all about you and you're here.
All right, so I guess I'll share my SoHelpful experience. I started because Kevin got me on one of these calls, and I was pretty adamant that this was not going to be a good use of my time. But after one of these hangouts, I realized, or someone else had mentioned, it's a great way to get blog content. And so I figured I'll give it a shot. And some large number of interviews later, I realized that it's actually a fantastic tool for customer development as well, and turned the calls where people were asking for advice into calls where I was asking about people's problems, and then eventually stumbled upon this idea of customer acquisition teams, which are really lean virtual peer groups. So a place for people who are practicing customer development and lean startup to get together once a week via Google Hangout and hold each other accountable and get support and brainstorm. And so that really came as a direct result of SoHelpful. I would not have probably done the difficult work of lining up all these interviews if people weren't calling me. And as a result, came up with a solution that I definitely would not have come up with on my own. And then started to test it out with some of the stuff, running acquisition tests to try and see which sort of channels convert the best. And it was really remarkable. The folks who called in on SoHelpful converted at a rate of, as you can see on the slide, 13%. Compared to my general blog subscribers, which converted at a rate of 1.6%. So clearly there's something special about the people who call in on SoHelpful. Either they're already actively engaged and they really like what I'm up to, and so they were already moved to call. And then somehow during the conversation I did not dissuade them from getting more involved in anything that I was building. Whereas the blog subscribers, maybe that number is inflated. Maybe people aren't reading the blog all the time, but I don't know. But clearly, this is the people who are calling in for SoHelpful calls are a very special group who should be nurtured and fostered, and something I will be considering going forward.
Hey Justin, just a quick call. This total here, these are these are basically people who've left you a recommendation, or are these the people who've actually booked a call?
Those are people who, so I use SoHelpful both as like a meeting place and as a place for people to call up and chat with me. Yeah. The 145 are all people who have called me and I have requested a recommendation from.
Okay.
So if you and I, Kevin, were on a call, I would not request a recommendation from you, but there are 145 people who I deemed worthy requesting a recommendation of, and so that's typically how I define whether someone is just a normal meeting or whether it's a SoHelpful advisory.
I got it. Okay. Well, Justin, I'd be happy to give you a recommendation.
I really appreciate that. I can finally get one. I 145 requests and I don't even have one.
So I'm gonna, at the risk of turning this into, so helpful infomercial, which I absolutely do not want to do. So I guess there's a couple things that, it's, and I didn't really get this from our, maybe from some of our email exchange, but I didn't realize that the sort of the ideas for doing these peer groups came out of the calls. But I guess it's just basically came out of just working with lots of entrepreneurs generally. I mean, the workshops you do, the going to. No?
No. You get sole responsibility for any success that comes from customer acquisition teams, whether it be my success or any of the beneficiaries of it. Because what I found was when I originally started doing these calls, I thought they were natural customer development calls. People are approaching me with their problems. But when I actually did a customer development interview, so I would use the first half hour of the conversation to address their problems, and then I would use the second half hour to talk to them about what was the most difficult thing about practicing customer development in lean startup. And what I heard were vastly different things than what people were approaching me with. So people were approaching me with specific questions about techniques, but the problems they were running into were very different. They were overwhelmed. I don't know what to test. I don't know what advice to listen to. I don't know where to go next. They didn't have accountability, so they didn't know, hey, I'm not as productive as I would like to be because I don't have a boss, and I'm not doing the difficult work of customer development. I wish someone would hold me accountable. And they were isolated. They did not have support of other people. While they may be surrounded by entrepreneurs, they did not have other people who were practicing these techniques. So it's worth mentioning that a SoHelpful call in and of itself I did not find to be equivalent to a customer development interview. However, I leveraged the interview to just easily transition from, okay, now that I've helped you, will you help me by answering my questions? And as a result of those three things, being overwhelmed, not having accountability, and isolation, that's the genesis for these customer acquisition teams.
Okay, so let me just make sure I can replay. So it's like somebody calls you because they want to help. Hey, Justin, I want you to review my interview script. And it wasn't the question they asked you. It was the follow-on dialogue. We were asking why. That's where you got the insight and figured out that there was a need for this.
Exactly. So I could have built here's an interview script generator tool, but that's more like a blog post, and that's a one-time tactical deal. What his real problem, that real entrepreneur's problem, was I don't have anyone to ask questions of, and I don't know where to go. And so that's where the customer acquisition teams, became evident.
Okay. So I should let other people ask questions. This is going to be my last one, but can you give me a sense of like the amount of time, because I have my own thoughts on this, but I want to hear you say it before I bias you with my opinion. The sense of time it takes to do a call versus the sense of time it takes to do write a piece of content. Because I mean, I guess one of the things that if I was looking at these numbers, I would say, okay, it converts higher, but there's only so many hours in a day I talk on the phone versus I can write a blog post and lots of people get it. So thoughts on that time trade-off for you personally? How does that pan out?
That's a really interesting question. It is an act of labor to produce a blog post for me. Like in the sort of making baby amount of labor. It takes me forever to do this kind of stuff, and I pour way too much energy into these things, mostly all mental. So for me to just have someone call me, although it may take up much more time to actually do these conversations, it's time that I don't dread, whereas writing a blog post is time that I dread. So I am much happier to do these sort of calls and then know that yes, I eventually need to build up and do blog posts. But for me, I would much rather have a conversation with someone and help them out one-on-one than write a blog post.
Interesting stuff. Okay, I'm going to shut up and go ahead.
Yeah, can I just add this, Spike? I just wanted to add one thing on this topic. For me, it isn't as much as it costs me less time, but it's a problem of depth. Calls go a lot deeper in establishing that bonding and in being able to help. The blog post, it's I can reach out to more people, and I actually ended up writing as many more posts now that I do calls than I did before taking the calls, because I generally use the blog post to expand on certain topics and follow up on questions that were asked. But really, the call allows me to help people in at a much deeper level than I would, because I can customize the recommendations and whatever that is. So for me, it's largely a question of impact rather than a question of time taken.
Interesting. Yeah, I would say that's probably true. I think so. Both of what you guys said is true for me. I probably take the blogging for me, Justin. I would say I would not describe it as much mental energy. Like for me, there's actually some like enjoyment in that creative process. But I get what you say. It just takes most of the questions I get are like the same ones over and over again, and most people want to be listened to and have me reflect back what their challenges are, and that doesn't take a lot of work or thought. Okay, great. Anybody else before I move on with questions for Justin? All right, so I'm gonna plowing ahead. So the one of the things I just want to point out, in case anybody's sort of watching this or new to this, is that one of the consistent patterns that I see with like anybody doing this is that they, especially even if you're trying to close a sale, is that the world less and less and less cares about like our solutions, and even like in my own career in the past 5 years, I'm shocked to see how much like like you say, a new product, new app, it's no longer interesting. It creates stress for people because they're so overwhelmed with new. So like if you just create the trust by generally helping them in something related to the problem that your solution solves. So even if it's not direct, that sort of help helps. That sort of type of help helps close sales. I don't see this as much on SoHelpful, but especially with the entrepreneurs that I work with, when their help is much more either directly or indirectly tied to, I'm going to help you use my thing, a lot less interesting unless your thing happens to be very well known and mature and tied to your product. An example would be something like a product like Kissmetrics that's more mature. They'll do a webinar, they'll do like a demo with somebody, a webinar to help them use the product, and because they've already got it there seems to be value in that kind of thing. So I'm just going to move on from that point to go to sort of the next one. The second thing that I hear from people is sort of reputation building, and what I've observed in talking to people that the primary needs are effectively, it's just so hard to get started today. The competition's overwhelming, the noise is amazing, and for people that are, either you're breaking into a new field, you got a new product, or you're starting your career, getting out of that is nuts. And so I'll just use an example from my own world. Is that in 2009, I could literally name by a first name basis anybody writing or doing anything with Lean Startup. And Eric would return our emails, and we'd get #1 on Hacker News, and we knew who each other were. We'd make intros, and then by 2014, you probably will not find an agile or a software development shop in the world that isn't aggressively looking at this as a way to train, teach, get work, build clients, help their clients deliver more value. So in an incredibly short period of time, I noticed with my blog traffic on my writing, it got from the point where 2009, 2010, I could write anything with the words Lean Startup in the title, and instant traffic. I think I'm the smartest guy in the world, and as it turns out, I wasn't the smartest guy. I just happened to be one of the first. And today, anything sort of Lean Startup Customer Development 101, that kind of basic content, unless it's the quality like Justin says, or the things that I really have to work hard to do, very, very hard to get above the noise. So I could give you a lot of examples in this, but just the one person whose permission I had to sort of use his content was Matias Hernandez, who is in Pamplona, Spain. A great guy. If you have a chance, just an absolutely awesome person. Don't be put off by the Spanish on his profile or his blog. He speaks very fluent English. So Matias basically explained this was effectively what the situation he was in. That his company was selling corporate workshops and corporate clients, and even though they weren't necessarily the people that would go ahead and maybe call him for help, they would see his testimonial, see the recommendations he has in his profile, and the credibility and the validation that ad really allowed them to sell more, do more workshops. And he also had a really interesting pipeline for how he got calls and converted the clients. And that is, he had a drip email course where he taught people content, and in the course he says, hey, if you need help, call me for help. And those people later became clients. And I've got plenty of other examples where people who've used this to sort of kind of build up their reputation when they were starting something new. So anyway, that's I'll sort of stop there and let anybody jump in with comments or questions on that one.
Hey, Kevin.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, I just wanted to say that that's the power of social proof. Definitely really strong, and that's what I love about this. The fact that you made it really easy for people to collect a testimonial after the call. I love how you've added that in, and it really does increase credibility for people that are just getting to know you. When they see that, it really has an instant effect on credibility level.
Great. So Jen just puts a comment here, which I'm gonna read. Actually, Jen posted this public, so I'm assuming she doesn't mind me reading it out loud. But so I'll just read what she said here in case you can't see. But agreed, it's human psychology. It's amazing to see that those we often see as experts are simply sharing what they have learned, which happens to be new or useful to the other party. Being humble and honest about that helps others build confidence in accepting where they are and where they can go, are their goals. I don't think I could say it any better than that. So that's definitely true. And I don't know if I cover this later in the slides because I talk about this stuff so often I forget it. But one of the things I've noticed is that, oddly enough, like doing this to build your reputation when you are a beginner can actually create more value than when you're the quote-unquote expert because you've just gone through the learning process. So if any of you know Jason Waringa, who's on SoHelpful, he learned Ruby on Rails, and right after I started teaching people about Ruby on Rails, and he was, even though I've been doing it longer, like I found him talking about it to be like I was hearing stuff that I didn't even know about resources were out there just because he had just learned it. So he was actually more up to date on what the educational tools are than I was, just because he had just gone through it. So that's sort of the beginner's mind brings a lot of value to people. Anybody else a quick comment on this one or examples from your own work of how sort of the reputation building? Okay, and I will go on from there. So the final thing that I'll sort of mention is like where direct reasons that people have told me about is hey, there's Jen joining us. Jen, do you want to do a quick intro since I've spoken for you?
Hi, I'm Jen. I'm actually hearing some words coming through, so I apologize if there's interference on my end. I'm Jen Mendez, and I am working on an educational program, and just glad to be here. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, yeah, sorry about the sound and interference there, Jen. It looks like you're just getting feedback from my voice. So I guess the final thing I want to say is like sort of creating evangelists. And there's a quote I like from Tim Ferriss about money being one form of currency. And if I remember correctly, he made that context in that kind of the context of the value he gets for people that come to his blog, interact, talk with him. And there's this, I don't know if any of you have read this whole notion of like the 1,000 true fans out there, but this idea that if you can make like 1,000 people who are deeply passionate about what you do and what's your work, you can effectively make a living from doing just about any creative work. So the value people get out of like helping others, even if it's not directly leading to like that person buying the sale, is telling other people, getting them recommendations, and then specific product feedback. And I'm going to jump in here with the best example I know of this, which is Brian Jordan, who's also on the call, but he's not talking here, so I'll let Brian jump in if he wants to with any comments, or if he wants to join, I'll let him tell a story. But Brian runs a site, or I guess a newsletter is probably the best way to put it, is Coding for Interviews. So the people that Brian is reaching are the programmer who wants to get a job at Google. And as you can imagine, a lot of these people are excellent at what they do, but are not necessarily very good at doing technical interviews. And he writes tips for them on how to do that, and has built up a pretty amazing newsletter subscriber list. So when Brian and I last spoke, I kind of interviewed him and asked him like the value he gets in having these calls for people and talking to a couple of people a week about what he's doing. And it surprised me to know that even with 10,000 subscribers or 12,000 subscribers, which is a pretty decent size newsletter, that isn't, driven by something that's sort of word of mouth, that, that Brian still got value for the people that he helped one-on-one, became like the most likely people to give him comments, give him feedback, give him product advice. So it's related to I guess what Justin talked before about the people you've helped are more likely to quote unquote buy from you one way or another. And in this case, the currency isn't necessarily giving you money, but it's the ones that are more likely to help you build a product and help you deliver a more valuable experience for other people. Go back, sorry about that. Questions, thoughts, comments on that one? Okay, so moving right along then, I'm gonna put the questions out to you guys and let you give me some advice. So I had, I think I mentioned before, these are like 3 direct reasons, and I have 2 other ones that I believe are the case. I just don't have a lot of evidence for it. Justin may have just cleared up one of them for me on this call, and that is what the biggest value I've gotten out of doing these is to put it in very practical terms, is knowing what to write about, right? And this whole idea that if people that are your potential customers, your audience, are constantly bringing you problems, just hearing about those problems and getting into like a deeper discussion, and Spike sort of touched on this too, it's just incredibly valuable to hear those. And so as I've talked to people that are out as service providers, what they will tell me is the coffee meetings, the one-on-one discussions they have with people are valuable because they have, even if they just help somebody over a discussion, that's information and content they can take to a client conversation later. And they can say, well, hey, that's interesting. I talked to someone last week that had that problem, and here's what they ran into. Here's what they're doing to solve it. So the way I like to think of it is like problems are at the intersection of value creation. Even if the solutions are funny, just knowing the problems is our opportunity to create value. And additionally, if people don't have a problem, you're not hearing about a problem, that's a pretty good indication that there is no value there. So I think Justin might be my new case study for this because I didn't have one from SoHelpful. But if anybody else has some specific examples where, and it doesn't even have to be SoHelpful, but basically being helpful and just offering to help people out has given you insight into problems, and that helped you come up with better content, better products, I'd really appreciate any thoughts you have on that.
Well, personally, and this is Spike, that's pretty much all I do. I mean, a lot of what drives the way that I'm redefining like the workshops and the stuff that I do in terms of helping entrepreneurs comes from insight that I derive from the calls. Like I've over the last 4 or 5 months, I've been doing a bunch of calls even before joining SoHelpful, and that has helped me a lot to identify a bunch of patterns, what kinds of things people get stuck onto, and what works and what doesn't. So the calls themselves, I think we talked about it when we had a chat, the 2 of us, Kevin.
Yeah.
I try to actually get recurring calls. So instead of just doing one-offs, I try to book follow-up calls with people because that allows me to, I feel personally, have a greater impact and follow them along the path. But also that gives me an insight on what works and what doesn't for them. So maybe I'll try with I'll write up some certain stuff and pass it on to them and see how it works out, if they manage to get clear about their customers or the products, or if they're working on MVPs. So all that insights that then shapes what eventually my training material comes out to be. It comes directly from the calls and the problems and solutions that people play with.
So Spike, maybe you can help me understand this a little bit more. So is it that you have one call with them, you hear about a problem, you give some advice, but then the insight comes from following up later and saying, how did that go for you? Is that it? And then having a follow-on discussion where you go in deeper. Is that where you get it from?
Yeah, for the solution, the insight will come from there. Some insights have come seeing patterns in the problems. Like I'll do, I don't know, 4 or 5 calls in a week, and most of the people will struggle with, most of the people that I talk to, a lot of the people that I talk to struggle with clarity around their customer's definition. And so they have too generic customers definition. So that for me, now that I've done all these calls in the past 4 or 5 months, it's the #1 problem that I need to deal with when I'm talking to a crowd of entrepreneurs, because the chances that actually most of them are struggling with that, it's really, really high. And that has been true in workshops that I've done after having done the calls. Like, those workshops have been more effective than previous workshops because I've changed the material based on insights that I got from the calls. And then insights about the solutions and what is helpful or not for them to overcome those problems comes from a follow-up calls. So, 4 weeks, a month afterwards, generally it's how long I give them. I'll check in again, I'll see how they're doing. And if they use certain techniques, like, I use a lot the Luxor persona development template, and so I'll tend to pass that to people and give them some advice on how to use it and put it in practice. And then if, a month afterwards they say, yeah, I came up with these and I talked to 10 people and those interviews went much better than before and I made a lot more progress and some became customers, that for me is a good signal that that kind of stuff is working. And so I retain it. And if they say, no, I've gone nowhere, I try to understand why. And sometimes is, the advice wasn't clear, the material wasn't clear, or there's other problems. So any call offers some kind of insight either on the problem or on the solution. Does that make more sense?
It makes total sense. Yeah. I'm just listening with rapt attention and absorbing it and thinking that I probably could have been doing my work a lot differently in the past year. But anybody else comments, questions for Spike on that?
Yeah, this is Lee. I have a question about that. I've done some calls with some of you guys, and I'm starting to take some calls myself. And I have a question about these follow-up calls and additional requests. People are sometimes asking me, hey, could you take a look at my, we'll do an initial call, and they'll say, hey, could you take a look at this press release and kind of rewrite it for me? In other words, they're asking me questions that would be normally paid services, and it seems to be crossing a boundary. It's kind of like someone saying to Justin, hey, I kind of have my customer interview put together, but could you take a look at this and write it for me? So I'm wondering, are there boundaries to set and have other people face this, and what do you do about it?
Should I take that, Kevin?
Go ahead. Yeah, I've got my answer, but go ahead, Spike. I'll let you guys first. And mine's pretty short, so I'll let you guys go first.
I generally turn that into questions for them. So I tend to never give them. I give them answers in terms of like pointers, like things they can read or things they can look into. But generally, I will ask them questions. So if they say, hey, can you take a look at this for me? Then I'll take a look, but I won't rewrite it. And if I read it and, for example, the message isn't clear, I'll come back to them and say, hey, I think the message isn't clear. I think you're not clear about who you're talking to. Have you done a personal development exercise? So that's what I do. I don't rewrite it for them. I just take a look and turn it into questions so that they can dig into and improve it themselves.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's clear.
Anybody else before I give
Can I add one thing?
Probably a less polite answer? Go ahead, Jen. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have, I guess, a couple things, and I have a feeling I know where Kevin's going with this. But my take is that really the key is to try and empower the people who are calling you, and if we just give them the answer without getting them to think, we're not empowering them to do anything beyond what the one question. And so I really like Spike's answer about how he said he asks them questions. He puts the ball back in their court. And I think that's really important, that there's nothing wrong with, at times, giving something that gets someone started in the right direction, but helping them figure out what are the questions they should be asking and how can they figure out how to do this so that they empower themselves in the future. And I know that's sort of a broad answer or a general answer to that, but for me, that's kind of, or the people who are calling me on so different than I think most of the other people here, because they're often already, and there are people that are sort of at a loss, so they do need some assistance to get going. But again, to me, the key is to empower them, and if you just turn around and write for them, and so why not even tell them that? Why not tell them, hey, I really appreciate that you think so highly of my feedback. I'd be happy to give you some, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to form it in questions, so you can start asking yourself these things and move yourself forward, not just with this press release, but with anything else you do in the future.
Yeah, and just a quick addition. The other good thing about using that approach is that it's a great filter for people, because those that are now willing to listen to questions and put in the work to answer them, there are people you don't want to do business with, and even less, spend more time and have a second call. So to me, that also functions as a good filter, because the ones that actually are genuinely looking for help and they're a hard worker, they'll take that on board and they'll go back and come back to you and say, hey, I've done I thought about what you said I should be thinking, and here's what came up. So that's it's been working. That's been working very well for me.
Yeah, I would say those are better answers than I would have said. So mine, usually I get those kind of questions from younger early stage entrepreneurs, often young enough to be my children, and so I usually just say, no, I can't. Hey, I can't. I'm sorry, I can't help you do that, but and then give them a couple suggestions. So I like your answers a lot better than mine. I don't typically get that kind of question though from people. Basically, I think the people that are more serious, the people that have more experience and are really committed to this, are far less likely to do that and are much more likely to just be appreciative of any of my time at all and not want to impose. That's been my experience anyway. Justin, does that happen to you?
Yeah, it has. I mean, I think Spike has taught me something. I really like that approach. I've never bought on it. Like, people send me an email and say, "Hey, can you look at this?" And I think maybe I would naturally sort of send back a one-liner like, "What do you think about this?" But yeah, I think I tell people they are welcome to follow up with me with anything they want, but that I may not be able to reply in a timely manner and just sort of set expectations. But
that's very similar. Yeah, that's pretty much with me. Unless it's one of the people on SoHelpful, then I always respond. Cool. All right, so I'm going to press on that one. I think we kind of through that topic there. So so this is the last one where I don't have any evidence for it, and maybe it's because I'm not talking to the right people yet, but instinctively it feels like retention is basically another way that like creates business value. And maybe this sort of happens as a side note, but there was a TechCrunch article the other day which a couple people sent to me about what the cloud vendors are doing. And for those of you who are not familiar with the tech community, it's effectively selling software via before 5 years ago, before 10 years ago, when you had to go and install something on a server, it was very, very hard for customers to switch. But now that people are buying things on a subscription basis, switching's a lot easier, and especially as customers demanding the ability to switch. So these vendors are realizing they have to be in the business of solving problems and being helpful, and not just providing a solution. So my hypothesis is that people will start using this for this, but I don't have any evidence. And if you have any advice or feedback from me, I sure would appreciate it. And if not, I will move on, and maybe it'll come to you later.
I mean, I think you can.
So
use,
Kevin, do you mean that?
Go ahead, Jen.
Go ahead, Jen.
Retention marketing. Do you mean retaining the customers you already have? Is that correct? Before I go on further.
Yeah, so I think when people look at their marketing budgets, they have like they have their marketing pipeline. They have different people are at points in the sales process, and they're trying to at some point there's a retention or get them to come back and buy something again later. So it's part of that. So that's where I've been thinking so that retention is part of the being helpful. Like, hey, we've got customers, we got to make ourselves available to help them solve problems, or we're going to lose them. So it's more of a defensive measure than an offensive measure. So that's my, it's no different. It's a next logical step after, hey, we provide good customer service, they're going to leave. And I think what people are realizing, that's no longer enough, at least in the cloud and the software space. That just answering the phone when they have a question or a problem isn't going to do it, because before they may call you once, but by the second time they're just going to leave. You have to kind of earn their trust to keep them to keep paying you. That's the context.
Yeah, I would say for my case that I do use and intend to use it more for retention marketing. But with what I'm doing, I'm not only creating not on my own, I'm creating something that has together with my community, and they have input the entire way, and there's different ways to provide input. But ultimately what I want to do is not just design an educational framework and program with my community, I should say, but ultimately my goal is to empower people within my community to start doing that for themselves, and then sharing what they are producing of knowledge and expertise as they develop it with their own children and sharing. And so I'm using it for retention marketing to not just bring people in, but then to help them continue to develop skills that do my business over time. And so, you know, there is a give and take to add that in there. It's retention because it's not just about bringing someone back to buy something from me. It's about bringing someone back to re-engage with the community and to buy something from maybe me, but maybe someone else in my community who has taken the ideas and the philosophy that I've started with and done something that's worked with them and their children, and now they're sharing it, making it available for others. And so, and all those things will be available within, you know, the website I've created and our community, so that the customers themselves are growing and developing and then adding to the business value beyond just what I could produce on my own. So they're trying to bring them not just back to buy my stuff, but back to engage with the rest of the community, and to add their own stuff in, because then they start getting value back as well because they are paid for that. And so anyway, that's again a slightly different take on it.
That, Jen, that was fantastic, and I had to put it I muted my mic so I could take notes as you were talking, and I think I'm probably going to follow up with you on that one because there was more good stuff there that I could absorb with my 44-year-old brain. Thanks, Jen. That was great. Spike, you had something you wanted to make a comment on that as well. I don't know if that was related to what Jen was saying.
Yeah, I just put it on chat as well. I was just saying, I think the way that customer support has evolved can be used as a proxy. I see these kind of helpful calls as an extension to that, as it's almost like customer support before they become your customers. Mm-hmm. But it's the same kind of thing where you maintain a relationship. I mean, if you take the example of Zappos customer support, you know, and the stories that people call in and ask about pizza delivery or whatever random questions, and they'll just be helpful and you know, try and answer whatever questions come through. To me, that's basically the equivalent. Like their support line would take any question and help customers with whatever they needed, Zappos related or not. And so it kind of brought them in even before they were customers.
Yeah, I'm gonna. You know, I knew that they had great support, Spike. I never heard that story before. I'm gonna follow up with you later on that one. I'm sorry
I think it's I think it's in his book, in Tony Hsieh's biography.
Excellent. That is obviously a good reference case study I can use. Great. Anybody else questions on this? Otherwise, I'll try to get through the rest of this and wrap things up. Okay, we've got, let's see, about 12 minutes left. So that's the last point I sort of wanted to make on the the insight. So that was the other one. Justin, we talked about this already. Insight was one of the points. Justin already raised this. And I'm just going to skip right through this. And so I'm going to, for the benefit of the people who are like sort of just getting started, I wanted to talk about what I see as the challenges are and what people can do to think about ways to get going with this. Because quite often what I found is that there's this reaction of, wow, this is awesome, Kevin. How do I do this? This is great. I'm going to sign up for SoHelpful, and the world's going to come rushing in. They're going to ask me questions, and I'm going to become popular overnight. And I would love for that to be the case. But what I've realized is, ironically enough, my original assumption 2 years ago was that the least capable people would be calling for help, and I've found that to be exactly the opposite. It's not like what I see at meetups. When I go to a random meetup or at a place and people kind of just have to go buy a ticket and show up, I get a lot of I get a lot of bad questions, honestly, and I don't mean that. That's probably mean that more negative than it should be. But I get a lot of questions from people who have obviously not taken even the first small steps to figuring something out for themselves. When I get calls from people, when people want to call me for help, I get a much different conversation. Maybe it's because of the time frame, maybe it's because they have to actually think through before they do something, but they generally tend to be smart people and people who are trying to solve a problem. And people who are smart and trying to solve a problem will take these steps. The lazy folks will just throw up their hands and say, well, I got a problem, let's go back to watching TV. And so those type of people tend to be really busy, skeptical, and honestly, they're pursued by everybody else because they are so valuable because they're trying to solve problems. So it just takes work and it's time, and it's obvious that I think pretty much everybody in this call is figuring this out. But I do meet a lot of people who are just starting with this, and this is their biggest challenge they have, is getting more people to call them, is getting more calls, quite honestly. So I'm going to talk about a few, like the tactics that I'm learning from people that are doing this. So the biggest thing I would say for people is that, like, one of the big challenges I see is somebody kind of comes to SoHelpful, and instead of thinking about the other person, they think about, like, how can I help? And so for me, I could say the example is I can give, hey, I can help you learn Chinese, hit a golf ball, do a startup, learn the code. Like, all of us have lots of experience that we can share, but to really get people's attention, we have to focus on them and what their needs are, and that's one of the biggest keys. And so I look at the people who are getting a lot of calls. And Justin's a great example. Whose like brand is sort of synonymous with early stage customer development, right? And if you look at his profile, where he speaks, where he talks, like, it all kind of drives people towards that end. Some of you that are talking now, are in very similar fashion. Again, I'm going to blast through this because I've written a lot about this before, and I'll be happy to help anybody more if they want help later. But one of the things I encourage people to do is, when you're starting out, like, create this target persona. And I use this very specific word, target persona, is like kind of the most important person you need to influence, that you want to help to kind of grow your business. Often that's just the paying customer, and I think for most of us on the call, that's probably it. But I will also work with entrepreneurs that are maybe in the education space, or they're in a space where the end customer isn't the most important influence. It's the person they really need to help to grow their business, is like somebody that's involved in the channel. An example would be they have an educational product, and it's actually more important for them to influence the teacher than it is the parent, because the teacher will be the one that sells the product to them. And I'm going to skip this over because this is mine, and you can read about it in my blog post. But here's an example of one that I've created. If you need help on writing a persona, the best person I suggest is Tony Zambito, because he does this for a living. So he does buyer personas for corporate clients, and this is kind of what he does all day. So he is a great one to ask for help if you need, persona generation in general. He's a great one to talk to. So I'm gonna blast the rest of this content and say the final few minutes for questions here. So what I try to do, I already made this point. The important point is to focus when you have your target. But everything I sort of write, speak, talk about, I try to address towards that person. And a great example of this is Bruce McCarthy. So if you look at Bruce's blog, Bruce's email signature, like, he's got a very specific target persona. It's like the product manager and a corporate client. And his testimonials, his writing, his product, his profile on SoHelpful, it's lockstep. You could basically, the Bruce McCarthy equals product management. Get better at it. And that's pretty much the brand he's built. And look at his blog. People that start with a call to action on their content that says, hey, let's chat, love to talk more, get in touch, very, very low conversion. The more direct you make it, tied to what the person needs, much, much higher. I don't have time to go into some of the metrics on this, but Justin's done some testing, and although I don't have hard data from mine, it was very clear to me, the more specific I made this, the better. So then I guess the final thing I'll sort of leave you with is, one of the benefits in terms of actually writing content is, and people have touched on this a little bit on the call today, but you can kind of create a sort of cycle of creating value for yourself. So if you know more about problems and you hear more from people, that helps you write better content, which gets you more calls, which helps you know more problems, which gives you better content. And suddenly you wake up one day and like everybody knows who you are because you've kind of entered in this content help cycle. So if you can organize all this around your target and helping your target, that's when people seem to really build their brands. The final, I'm going to just touch on this very quickly, but I touched on this already. Being a beginner is more of an asset. And 2 examples from my own self. Before I started working on SoHelpful, when I would try to write a piece of content, I tried to be original and clever and smart and contributed something unique to the lean startup movement. And it turns out nobody cared. What people really wanted was answers to very, very basic questions. So one of the most popular blog posts I've done is effectively how to manage a checklist for scheduling customer development calls. And I only knew this because people asked me about it. I think Spike and some others on the phone have provided some, or on the call today, provided some better examples than this, but this is just some other ones that I wanted to mention. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up there, and since we've got a couple minutes left, and sort of open it up to questions. I can stay on longer, but I want to also be respectful for your time in case folks want to drop off. So questions, feedbacks, anything related to building your business, or any other ways that myself or those other people on the call can be helpful.
Hey, Kevin.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I've got some quick ideas for people who want help in getting more calls and reaching out to more people. One way to do that, which I'm using right now, is through LinkedIn. Through being on having a shared membership in a LinkedIn group, you can message someone who's also in that group, and if they look like you can look at their profile and to see if they look like someone that might need your help, and you could message them directly. And I've been doing that and getting calls that way, and it works out pretty well. So it's just that you have a little bit of a message to introduce yourself and say, hey, this is what I do. If you wanted my help, be glad to talk with you. So.
And are these people who would be people for like you do interview for your book or for your consulting practice? What's the context of the conversation?
Yeah, I should have gone into that more. It's more for the context of people that I would be able to serve through my coaching program. So people that I can help become better managers, better executives in their coaching and leadership.
Got it. So so what's the name of the group that you're in there, just to maybe help a little more? Like what's the name of the
well, one good group for me is Harvard Business Review. It's so big, there's so many members, right? Thousands and thousands of members. But there's lots of different groups. There's startup. I'm sure there's one or more lean startup groups on LinkedIn, and that's another way that people on this group might get good, generate more interest in calls.
So Spike, you do something very similar with the Lean Startup Google group. Is that correct, or did not really come through that channel?
Yeah, as I think we mentioned in one of the emails we exchanged, a lot of my calls they actually come either from a Lean Startup group or even Twitter. But basically the point is always the same. Like there are existing conversations. So in a lot of the cases, I'll contribute to a conversation and then I'll have a mention in my signature that I do this mentoring call, or I'll offer to do a call to go deeper, like some things that are hard to just resolve on a forum. So I'll kind of try and help, and then if you want more, just go here and book a call. So that model has worked really well for me, and I think part of the reason is because in that case, you can work with the person that you've already defined as your persona. So when you engage, you kind of already know who you're talking to, and so that for me has a pretty high conversion.
So, in Spike, in your case, you're just basically saying, hey, this is I've seen you do this in the past. You kind of drop in like, hey, here's a little bit of some feedback, but if you want more, we can chat about it. I've seen you do that like publicly in the group. Is that a good summary of how you do it?
Yeah, and I've done it both on Twitter, on Google groups, on some communities. I'm in the Running Lean. I think the one that you saw was in the in the Running Lean Mastery. Someone was asking about staffing mentorship, and another one just happened today. Someone was asking about doing courses, and I say, here's how I use Lean to develop my own courses. And it's a pretty complicated topic, so if you want to discuss about specific questions, just book a call through SoHelpful, and it showed up like 30 minutes later.
Excellent. And Gail, yours is more, but I think Gail, you're talking more about not posting it in the thread of the group, but actually messaging the person directly. Is that the case?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I have a special LinkedIn sales premium membership level, which is something like $50 a month, and that enables me to see their profile and make sure I only message people that would have probably some interest in what I'm talking about. So I don't message people who just have no alignment with with my persona, right?
Yeah. Oh, got it. Okay. So, and what's any sense of the number of messages you send out to convert to a call? How much time it takes? Can you give us any kind of context on what the investment on your time is for doing something like that?
That I don't have enough data yet. That's tough in terms of a conversion, percentage that convert. I really don't have enough data because I've been only doing this for about 2 weeks. But the people are very cool people, and they're very. I've only had 1 negative reply and 20 positive replies. Not everybody goes to the next stage of setting up a call, but I have had a lot of good email interactions, even though I haven't had calls with everybody who replied. I've had great email interactions and people who have come to watch my video on coaching because of it.
Great, excellent. And so these are not people where you saw a thread. This is just I saw their profile. They seem like a good candidate, and I'm going to contact them. It's like the cold email out of LinkedIn. Is that a good way to put it?
Exactly. And if and it's annoying maybe for some, but most people don't seem to mind. Only 1 negative reply out of hundreds of messages sent.
Yes, it's also, I think, different communities, different priorities. The startup community is very different than the corporate coaching community, I'm guessing.
Yep.
All right. Great feedback. Like I said, I can keep going if anybody needs to drop off. You're not going to hurt our feelings by dropping off now, because I know some of you, it's it's getting late there, especially on the East Coast. Any comments, questions, feedback anybody wants to give me?
I'll just toss in that as I've been moving from problem interviews into solution interviews and solution testing, that I've tried some things that have not worked and have tried some things that are working. And initially, what made the most sense was people were asking for continuing on conversations on a paid basis, and I began doing that. But a couple of things grew out of those that I'll just throw out for anyone thinking about doing something similar. The first is it doesn't scale, which is pretty obvious, but I wasn't too afraid of that. The other thing that became clear was the nature of the conversations on my end changed pretty significantly when I was being paid for my time as opposed to doing it for free. And the reason was I really felt compelled to provide extra value, and I started shifting from an advisory role and a mentor role into an expert role, and really trying to jam my awesomeness down someone's throat because they were paying me. Now that has to do with my own internal stuff, and it exposes things that I need to work through. But I'll throw that out. On the plus side, the customer acquisition teams finding a solution that really resonates with people. It now makes that every call without me having to do any sales at all. The very first time I saw this on Kevin's blog, I was like, oh, sure, I call you for 30 minutes, and the last 10 minutes are you talking about how awesome you are and selling me upselling. Well, now it just sort of comes out naturally that, hey, what else, how can I stay in touch? And I say, well, other founders have found blah, blah, blah helpful, and then so far the response has been pretty positive. So using this as a tool to develop the product and then for the people who call in and then selling it back to them seems to work really well, because the solution has been designed explicitly by other people just like them.
Yeah, I think that's been my experience as well. I mean, I've never tried to do the pay work, but that's how I felt about it. It's like it doesn't scale, changes the nature of the conversation. Not really what I want to be doing with my time. And I guess the thing too is that at least in the domain that I work, from my point of view, like startup advice and helping with startups is not something where there is an answer. Unlike paying somebody for like legal advice or accounting or tax advice, I mean, there's very, you're kind of, that person's giving you an inch of the time that's very valuable because you can tie it to like a specific result. And like half the time, like, if startups were that prescriptive, then all the VCs in Silicon Valley would be rich, right? But they're not, right? Because it's not prescriptive. Anybody else have thoughts on that they want to mention? Maybe some people are selling their time because it's a different audience. I'd be kind of curious to see what people say.
The one thing I would say is that some people actually didn't take up the offer of checking in again because it was free. Like they really want the paid engagement because they wanted more time, and they didn't care as much about doing another 30 minutes call in a month. So I've had a few of those.
Interesting.
On the other end, I've had people being very happy and sort of and coming on board because and that's one of the things that they told me, they saw a genuine effort to help. So that has been, on the other end, one thing that it's been often recognized. Like people saw, because there was no upsell, there was nothing. It was just like, yeah, I'm trying to do this, and for me, that has been really important on my own side to make that messaging very clear. Like, and I know on spyclub.org, the home page really opens with the reason why I do what I do, and that is tied into the calls. And people have often mentioned that to me as the thing that convinced them to make the call.
Interesting. So I mean, just kind of going on your experience, Spike. So the paid work you've done with the one-on-one, was that a like valuable relationship? And I'm going to let value sort of open up, and there's lots of different ways you can define it. Was that valuable to you afterwards? Worth it? And like, did you get like the kind of thing you'd do it again, or was it just something you tried once and not like? How do you feel about doing that in the future?
It's worth it. I think it can totally work out. It's just not what I'm interested into. So I don't have it's not where I want to go as I develop my own business and my own startup and do my work. But it's certainly viable. And I looked at it for a while, and so I wanted to test it. It was one of the things that I thought I might be doing for the next year. But that's not where I'm going anymore, so I kind of dropped it, and I made it very clear that my effort was just for free to try and help and support the entrepreneurship movement. But it's definitely works, and I think there's plenty proof out there from Clarity and other sites, and I mean the Google Helpouts are doing really well. I mean, people are making good money there as well. So there's definitely enough proof out there that this sort of even the 30 minutes call for money is worthwhile to a lot of people. I don't think there's any question there.
Yeah, interesting. It's I would really love to see how like the metrics work on these kind of services in aggregate, because I've just always been skeptical of they basically pay me for my time, the question and answer stuff, only because I've seen so many people try it since like 1997, and other than sort of 1-900 numbers and like astrology, no one's been able to figure out how to make it work. But it could be that we're entering a new era of people are disconnected. It's just another way for people to value exchange, that the time is finally ready for that to happen. I just don't know enough about the data, and I'd like to see what the data looks like, basically.
I don't know what the data exactly looks like on Helpouts. What I can say is that what I've seen working, people that seem to be booking a lot of calls and make money, were services where the outcomes were very tangible, which is what you were saying earlier.
Yeah, exactly.
So, for example, like simple things like translations.
Yeah.
Or translation services. Or I've seen it used for help desk. Like my computer doesn't work or it's broken. I need someone to help me right away, right now. So I don't know.
Yeah. That like legal accounting of something where people are basically already paying for a service and they can see very clear like a result that I'm going to get out of this time. I agree. That's where I've seen it too. So maybe 1-900 numbers in astrology fall into that too. I don't know. Great. So I guess we're getting close to wrapping up, and I saw some people are dropping off now because it's getting late. Anybody else? Questions, comments for me? Open to anything.
Thank you for doing it, man. Love it.
No, thank you, guys. Appreciate it. So we're going to stop the broadcast now. If anybody wants to stay on and needs sort of like feedback, help, whatever, I will be here.
Thanks, guys.